Welcome back to the Craftsman Online podcast. This is a weekly program focused on the relevant topics in Freemasonry and the various aspects of the craft. Any opinions, thoughts, or viewpoints shared during this program are that of the individual and do not reflect the official position of any Grand Lodge, dependent, or concordant body from which that member may hail. I'm your host, Brother Michael Arce, Editor-in-Chief of CraftsmanOnline.com, and from one Editor-in-Chief to the other, we welcome Right Worshipful Robert Johnson. Welcome back to the Craftsman Online podcast, RJ.
Brother Mike, it's so awesome to be here. Again, love what you guys do, so thank you so much.
There's a smile in my voice for a couple reasons. I look up to RJ as kind of the godfather of Masonic podcasting. If you haven't listened, his podcast is the Whence Came You podcast. He also has the Masonic Radio Theater podcast. And if we went through his Masonic bio, we'd be here all night. But I do want to mention he is a 32nd degree Mason, past master of Waukegan Lodge number 78, and founder of Space Novum Lodge number 1183. In Illinois. And what's touching about this is that before every episode, we read the disclaimer saying the thoughts here are of us and not of any Grand Lodge. And I think this is going to be timely, as the topic tonight is a tale of two lodges and the difficult journey that sometimes we find ourselves in Freemasonry when it's time to break up. Facebook official, like demit from a lodge and go find another. When you enter a lodge for the first time, you're so excited to get that first degree and find out what this is all about. I'm going to guess it was the last thing that crossed your mind is that someday you would be leaving that lodge.
Yeah, it definitely was the last thing on my mind. I had these thoughts that essentially I would come into Freemasonry and I would give back everything that I could to the lodge. Like, I went to serve the lodge first. So I told them, I said, hey, I would love to get involved and I would love to take a chair. And they said, well, our officer line is full, so we'll put you on the slate for next year. And I said, okay, cool. And so at that time, it was like, you're going to work your way from junior steward through the chairs. Okay, cool. Progressive line, no biggie. But man, like 8 years, that seems like forever. And it comes and goes. The year I was worshipful master, I also took on, the senior warden. I took on the job of a district education officer and did that for 2 years. And the year after, when I became a past master, that was the year they put me in as a DDGM. And at the same time, my secretary of my mother lodge, Waukegan, had been grooming me to take over the secretary spot for Waukegan because I was a guy who was there every week. Like, we had, it's a stated meeting every month, but it's a weekly meeting for Waukegan. We met for fellowship or degree practice every Monday. And I think in 8 or 9 years, I probably missed, 10 Mondays. It was like my church, man. Like, I would always go, and lodge is still like that for me, but I loved to serve, and that lodge had given me so much. So I just felt like I would never, ever have to leave.
And we're kind of almost told that, when you go through the degrees, that really there's two ways to get out of Freemasonry, which is similar to like a marriage almost, where there's divorce and then there's the other option, you pass away, or you lay down your working tools and go to the celestial lodge above. And they're very open about that in the degrees, at least the part about what happens to you after your time here on earth is done. So you're thinking that, and I was right there with you. Like, the last thing I thought about when I joined my mother lodge was that someday I would be walking out the door for the last time, never to step foot back into that lodge again for personal beliefs and personal reasons. What I also found compelling about your story the last time you joined us, and I say this with a smile on my voice because I'm hoping to get the same story from you, is this was the lodge that you rode a bike to attend, correct?
That's right. Yeah, I lived in downtown Waukegan when I first started, and it wasn't like a long bike ride, but the first time I did it, I threw my shorts on and I rode there in the summertime because our lodge doesn't go dark or anything. So we would get there in the summertime, and I walked in and I showed up in shorts just one time because somebody just decided they were going to ripped me a new one for wearing shorts to the lodge. I'm like, well, I rode my bicycle here, man. So after that, I started wearing like those zipper pants. So I wore shorts there, and then I would zip my pants on and then go in.
Right. That's an upgrade, actually.
Yeah. They're like zipper khakis, but it was really a cool experience to be able to, attend a lodge in an old school kind of industrial city like Waukegan with this rich history of a lodge, 1849. And I mean, it took me 20 minutes to ride my bike there. And one night I showed up, and this is probably what you're talking about, but it used to be like this competition on how fast they could get through a business meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And start to finish, I remember we ran through it all. I think I was junior deacon at the time. And they ran through everything. And the master looked at the secretary and he said, "How fast was it?" And Carl said, 17 minutes, gavel to gavel.
Jeez.
It took me 20 minutes to get here. 17 minutes? And then what? I'm going to retire to the other room to eat some tomato sauce on a cracker? Like, this is stupid.
Mm. For you, it was like a physical, but also a educational gap that you were not getting. For me, not so much physical. We had pretty great dinners, and I did enjoy the company of the brothers, but there was the esoterical part, the larger part, where's the learning that's coming involved here, that began to spark questions in my mind of, oh, there's other lodges in my district. I could go visit them, or maybe I could become a plural member. I've heard other brothers do this and go check this out, or I could go join other bodies in Freemasonry. And at this point, I kind of want to, shape around this is that how, in your opinion, how common is it for a brother to join something, it's not really a good fit for me, and then decide, well, I'm gonna demit versus I'm gonna quit and never show up again, but keep paying my dues?
I don't know that it's all that common. I mean, what we typically see is guys who come in, get their degrees, or maybe a degree. Like, let's not talk about the people who don't finish degrees. Like, let's talk about a master mason who's attended for a little while, hoping things would get better, and then doesn't, and then kind of falls off. I mean, that happens quite a bit. And I'll say typically they don't actually plural out, right? They just stop paying their dues, or they just demit.
Right.
But most guys don't know anything about demitting, so they just stop paying their dues, and then I mean, for the most part, if we're talking about most lodges, they keep them on the rolls forever, and then they just keep racking up the dues, and then one day they offer them a deal to come back for $20.
Right. No, I mean, I laugh, but it's true. It's what happens is that, the inside baseball of Freemasonry is for every member, master mason of the lodge, you have to pay an assessment to your grand lodge. So there is a cost for the lodge to operate, which is kind of built into your dues. And if you stop paying, well, then they have to keep paying. And as RJ mentioned, they're going to run into the red over you eventually. But they still want you to be a part of it, because I think at our core as Freemasons, we're good people, and we want you to come back, and what can we do to make things change? And then that's where there's that difficult decision. What surprised me was hearing brothers talk about demitting, and then I think anyone who's been working or been a professional, you're familiar with the concept of giving your resignation or 2 weeks notice. Did you feel that you were kind of going through the same steps when you demitted from a lodge?
So at the time that I demitted from Waukegan, I had been the secretary going on my third year. And I told them at the beginning of that year, I had already been working towards chartering Space Novum. I am not going to be the secretary of two lodges. I already knew that I would be the secretary of Space Novum. I kind of prepped them. I said, look, number one, do not elect me to the secretary chair. I will decline the offer. And that's always going to be an awkward thing. Don't do that. And then I didn't plan on demitting until we actually had our charter in hand. So we started Space Novum. And then when we finally got our charter, I waited 3 months. And all this time I had not been attending my mother lodge. So they had been operating with an interim secretary who did a great job. The thing that drove the demit was, several factors, right? You mentioned the educational thing. right? We weren't getting that. I had tried to get guys to change things for the better, to go more after the education and whatnot, and that didn't happen. Or if I wasn't there, it wasn't going to continue to happen. Like I couldn't change the culture, and that was frustrating. The last thing I did, I had processed my own demit.
Wow. Okay.
And here in Illinois, you're a secretary, so you kind of have you know all of the tools to be able to do this. And so when I processed my demit, I printed out the forms, I signed everything. I made sure that my dues were current for my mother lodge. I had paid them all up, and then I sent that via email and snail mail to the lodge secretary and master, and I informed them, you only have to ask one question, and that is, am I current on my dues? If they're current, you just gavel and grant the demit. There's no vote or anything else. Like I tried to make it very plain and simple, like just do these things and we can have a nice
Yep.
amicable breakup.
Yep. I do want to get to the part of what inspired me to make this decision when I demitted from my mother lodge, but the driving force behind it was we served 2-year terms in that lodge. So I was going into my second year of being the junior warden of that lodge. And I was sitting in the South and looking and going, well, there's so many things that I want to do during my years as master of this lodge that I don't think are going to be what ultimately the majority of the members are looking for. And it's going to be an unfun 2 years for me because I'm going to have to compromise and not be able to do the things that I want to do to bring the lodge to a different level. And the lodge wouldn't really want to go there with me wholly with the full membership. Some brothers would, but not all. And I just didn't want to have to deal with those that were going to be kind of working against that process. And, you know, you and I had talked a little bit before this podcast, and there was also a personal difference that I had with another brother who was in the officer line that was well entrenched. And I decided I will talk with the worshipful master about this. I will tell him that as dear friends that we are, and as much of a big fan of and a supporter I was of him, that I would stay through the rest of the year that I was elected, but I would not seek, similar as you, I would not seek election. Please don't nominate me either. And I will stay until the new junior warden would be elected and installed, and then I would demit. And that was exactly the exit plan. And I have never stepped foot back into that lodge, and because of, you know, time and where I'm located now in the country, I don't think I will ever. But I knew in my heart that it was the right thing for me to do because, like you, this is what inspired me. There was a time when I was writing for the Midnight Freemasons. RJ is also the co-editor of the Midnight Freemasons blog. And there was an article that we're going to share the link to here on our podcast notes that is titled, "Don't Like Your Lodge, Find Another." And there's basically two choices. Well, three, but we are hoping you take one of the two. One is that you find another lodge that's a better fit. Two is that you start a new lodge, because three is that you just stop showing up and then nobody gets better on that. I do want to talk about the positive side of this. And you were able to start a new lodge, Space Novum, number 1183, and move forward. So what was the momentum? What was the driving force? What was the energy that you were able to find in Masonry thanks to this new lodge?
That's a awesome question, because we found camaraderie and we found affirmation with other brothers who wanted this also. And we know, like from looking at the quality type of memberships and historical data and European concept lodges, I don't mean like TO or whatever. I just mean like smaller, more intimate lodge meetings where brothers, maybe there's not even 45 members or something, right? Having a group of guys that are genuinely excited and ready to sign on to education that Mike Arce wants. Like if we went to a meeting one day and we said, here's the educational plan for this year, Any thoughts? We've got a couple open nights. What do you guys want to do? And somebody says, well, I really like the theme you've proposed here. I'm really interested in music theory. Can we do something on that? Yep. And the brothers are like, let's totally, like, maybe 10 guys are out there looking for a cool, professor of music to come do something for the lodge. That kind of energy is what we were really looking for. We wanted to step away from things like writing checks to organizations that are outside the Masonic fraternity. We wanted to step away from, it sounds silly, but the fraternity side of the fraternity. Like,
wasn't going to be a social club anymore. I got you.
Yeah. We all thought if for whatever reason we didn't get a charter, we would still just meet, except we wouldn't open or close. We'd be a philosophy club, right? I mean, that's just what it would be.
Yeah.
That's kind of what it took. And it was a lot of energy with people who are very dedicated to the idea. And I think the hardest part about this, because I don't know of another way to do it, was we had to get buy-in from people and like really know that they were into it. And the only real way to do that today is through skin in the game, which equals dollars.
And I'd like to kind of stick on this theme because this is exciting to me, is that in an era where you have lodges that are either consolidating or closing, very rarely do you hear of new lodges that just receive their charter or their dispensation. And one of the things that I wanted to follow up on with here is that you had an opportunity to speak to the Grand Secretary of Illinois about forming new lodges. And I'm curious to hear what his thoughts were and if anything he had mentioned surprised you.
As a Grand Secretary, one of the things that they see are really objective views of the constituency. They see what happens and where it happens, and they've got great insights. And so when we asked him, we were the third lodge to charter in the last, I think it was like 7 years or something. So they had recently dusted off the how-to guide, 8 or 9 years prior, and then chartered one lodge. Then they chartered another lodge like 5 years later. Then they chartered another lodge a year after that, and then they chartered us. And then the year after we chartered, somebody else chartered. And it's almost like when people understand how easy it is, they get on and they go, oh, let's do it. But when I asked the Grand Secretary at a town hall meeting, I said, what are your thoughts on these new lodges that pop up? And he said, and I didn't think it would be this way, but he said, it's all well and good, but what we see is not an increase in membership. We see guys plural and then demit from the other lodge they were a part of. So our members stay the same. So
yep.
In essence, he honestly said, like, in terms of the Grand Lodge's view, it didn't sound like it was anything, quote unquote, good, which I think is kind of crazy, because I think if you charter a new lodge and, RJ and Mike, we go start some new lodge and we're super fulfilled by it and we demit from the other lodge, you would think you'd have a genuine happiness for the two guys who found what they were looking for. And by the way, I'm still getting my per capita as a Grand Secretary in Grand Lodge. But no, it's almost like it's an administrative burden. They don't see it as a way to gain membership. It was a bizarre answer.
The solution to the issue is, at least on this question, is you either start a new lodge, or another common thing is you'll have a group of brothers who take over a dying lodge that is desperately in need of a culture change or a cash influx. And usually it's a combination of of those two things. And that was the situation of after I left my mother lodge. I had moved 40 minutes to the other side of the Hudson River and started attending a lodge in Troy, New York. And what compelled me about that lodge was that all but 2 members were affiliated members. There were only 2 members of that lodge that were actually raised brothers of that lodge, which was fascinating to me. And we used to call each other kind of the island of misfit Masons, because we all came to this place looking for what didn't exist in our mother lodge, and this became our quote-unquote home. And it was a really special and unique place where the normal things like politics that would kind of drive you a little crazy in a lodge situation, they weren't there. So there were a lot of opportunities. So if you wanted to be the lodge education officer, or you wanted to plan the dinners or get involved with, there wasn't already established people that had been in that spot for years, and there was room for you to do the things you wanted to do, which I found very rewarding. And it came around just at the time in my Masonic career where I needed to experience those larger leadership roles to be able to move forward. I have a ton of respect for brothers that start a new lodge, because to me, that's a scary concept. You're literally starting from scratch. You have no treasury. You have whatever members you can attract through however you've been able to beat this drum and get them to come in. You don't have a history. The exciting part is that you get to be the people that sign that charter. And you get to be that first line of membership. But I personally would be hesitant to want to jump into something like that. So I have nothing but respect for brothers that do it.
Yeah, it's definitely a commitment, both financially and mentally. But I think when you've got a lodge that is, I don't know, knocking on death's door, and you've got an influx of members who go, why don't we just go over here? These guys need help. They're on their last leg. We can go in there, reinvigorate them.
Yep.
Put out a call for a bylaw change, right? And then rewrite the bylaws, rename the lodge, like relaunch it. And those things, I think they take just as much time and just as much effort, if not more, sometimes, because you have to deal with old mentalities, right? They always say you can't teach an old dog new tricks. I think you can. And something that I think deserves to be brought up here is that there is a stigma about seasoned members not being about education, or not being about some of the things that our younger constituency might be looking into. And the fact remains that our older members, I think a good number of them, are interested in these things. They just haven't had them in so long. You ever like stop eating peanut butter and jelly for like a year and a half, and then you have one and you're like, oh my God, I forgot how good a peanut butter and jelly was. Right. And that's kind of like some of these seasoned dudes.
Yeah.
They're ready for a change, and they like it.
The first time I had a conversation, I call them veteran brothers because I feel like older brothers. I've seasoned is also tough too, but I started having a esoteric conversation, and this brother was like right there with me, and I'm like, wow, I just thought he was a member of all these concordant bodies because his wife was kicking him out of the house every night of the week. I had no idea that he was really fascinated with this part of the Heramic legend, or had these thoughts about this working tool. And it completely changed my mindset, where I'm like, wow, the first place you want to go for this is the older guys. Think about it. If you're a 20, 30 year member and you're still coming to the lodge, that you're still engaged. Most likely you're not coming there for dinners. I'll just leave it at that.
Totally agree. I think there's some guys that will just floor you with what they've had. You know, they're coming back and they've been thinking about these same things for 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
They've heard side conversations about these things for 30 years. And now you can, ping them on something and they'll come out of the woodwork with just, wild perspectives and things that you've never even thought about. Yep. So they're a real asset, that they can be.
I'll say a couple things. I think in the area of demitting, and I'm not, proud to share this fact, but I'm a little bit more experienced in this. I've had to demit from 2 lodges because of relocation and moving. I've also demitted from the York and Scottish Rites, and also the Tall Cedars of Lebanon. Also because of relocating, but also because of not really knowing what one of these organizations was, joining under a pretense of thinking it was one thing and just finding out, I'm just going to stay kind of focused in Blue Lodge. So I don't really see personally, and these are my thoughts, my opinions, I don't see a stigma around a brother who makes the decision to demit. One thing I would say when it comes to the concordant bodies, if you're sitting here going, oh, well, I don't really like going to my lodge. All they do is argue about meals or the roof or the bills, and I'm going to go join one of these other bodies and go do that. Well, that is an option you can always take. My thought is that there's probably another Blue Lodge in your area, in your district, that might benefit from somebody like you with your talents or what you're looking for. And it might be worth exploring that. Just me personally, I'm like, we have to keep Blue Lodges healthy and strong so that they can continue to support the rest of our Masonic families. But if you've got that extra time and this is what you're really looking for, I think that could be a fit for you long term so that you are still able to be engaged in a Blue Lodge. And then maybe that leads to demitting from the lodge that isn't working for you.
Totally agree. I think there should never be a stigma about demitting. I mean, I have caught wind of things that people have said after I left Waukegan. And those things were, not super kind. I let the lodge down or whatever. And it's like, I was probably one of 3 or 4 people that carried that lodge. And by leaving, all I figured I was doing was allowing them to take the course of actions that they want to take, unbiased by my personal feelings. Like, I'm going to kick you out of the nest. Or actually, you can stay in the nest and I'm leaving. And that's the way it went.
Right.
And I don't think that there should be any kind of, I don't know, stigma about demitting. In particular, we are people, right? Like right now, never before in history probably has there been this kind of thing in the corporate world where we don't have pensions anymore, and so company loyalty is kind of out the door, right? Like I go where the money is, where I'm respected, and where I'm going to see challenges that are going to be fulfilling to me by working towards solutioning and doing all these things, right? And so we move from job to job. Sometimes many of us have different 3 or 4 companies under our belt by the time we're 40.
Yeah.
When you think about that, put that in a Masonic context, and all of a sudden you think, I'm going to vote with my feet. I'm going to go where the challenges are and where I'm getting the most fulfillment.
Yeah.
I'm not going to keep working part-time for 3 other companies.
You made the point for me. I was going to talk about great advice I got from a therapist at one time where she said, well, if you're 50% of the problem, the good news is you're 50% of the solution. The thing that I would say to, a brother who's listening right now, who's trying to balance that decision, like, do I stay? I feel horrible if I leave. I recently rewatched the Ozark series because I watched the first season and the pandemic happened and I got put on the back burner and all the other seasons came out and then the season 4 came out and everybody was talking about it. So I'm like, I'll just watch 4. I can always go back and rewatch, which I did. So I think it's season 3. Do you watch the Ozarks, RJ?
I have never seen it.
Oh, okay.
But feel free to spoil.
So it takes place, get this, in the Ozarks. It's fantastic. But there's a scene where Jason Bateman's character, Marty Bird, is abducted, kidnapped by his boss, who's a cartel by the name of Navarro, and he's in Mexico. And he's asked the question, what is it that you want? And he's not able to really answer that question. So for lack of a better term, he basically gets tortured for a week. He's locked in a cage and listens to loud music and sensory deprivation and all that fun stuff. And then finally, in what you feel is like a week, he's like, I know what I want. And he's yelling. My point is to the brother listening is that I don't want you to be in that situation and have to go through a year or more of deciding and figuring out what it is that you want, and that's what's going to be the thing that makes you move on. If in your head you know what you're looking for, there's nothing wrong with, I would say, the conversation, if you feel comfortable, starts with the worshipful master, letting him know that this is what's going on, and then going through the steps of sharing your demit and moving on. All that's going to happen is basically the same thing that happened when you joined the lodge. They're going to read your demit in the lodge. The brothers are going to vote on it. But that doesn't mean that you can never come back. You can come back to that lodge if you want to reapply for membership and rejoin. You can come back if that's a decision later down the road that you want to make. It's not permanent.
Yeah, and in many cases, depending on the jurisdiction, there may or may not be a vote. Like in New York, there's likely a vote or something. Here in Illinois, I turn in my demit, and as long as I'm paid up on my dues, the master just grants it. He's like, "Yep, granted, bye."
It's like the Irish goodbye. Where'd RJ go?
Yeah.
Now we're not going to get out of
guys.
here for 20 minutes. Jeez.
Yeah.
And I think the other important thing is we're going to leave a lot of resources in the show notes for this. Definitely some thoughts from the Midnight Freemason articles and just from each other on writings that we've done. But the other part is that you're not alone when it comes to this. It's a difficult thing. For many of us, we take Masonry as serious in our personal lives as any other relationship that we have. And I'm talking about like a marriage or a committed partnership. And these brothers, yes, we hold a deeper tie to them. And it's very difficult because sometimes these decisions are just made on a couple things or because of the actions of a couple people. And as long as you handle yourself with grace and treat the process respectfully, people will understand. And who knows, you could start Space Novum in your jurisdiction and they'll want to come and be a member of it.
Yeah, and to echo your sentiment, Mike, I just would say also that it's about your fulfillment, and you shouldn't feel guilty, or guilted into staying somewhere or whatever. Like, follow your interests, and your life will be better. Just take the appropriate steps. Don't burn bridges. Don't be a ding dong. Do the right thing.
This has been the Craftsman Online Podcast. I want to thank my guest this week for joining us, the Right Worshipful Brother Robert Johnson. Thanks for coming back, RJ.
Anytime. I love this. You guys are awesome.
Well, since you said anytime, I think, in the future, I want to do an episode where there's more smiling and happiness and cheerfulness.
Sounds great.
Just a reminder that new episodes of the Craftsman Online Podcast are available for download every Monday morning. Until we get together next time, let peace and harmony prevail.